Hello, interactive artists and designers. Today we are going to talk about a super important topic, media queries. And these are really important because to really create a responsive design, you have to be able to adapt your design to the screen, right? So far we've been able to use percentages and variable units like ems to accommodate, things from like vertical display devices that are fairly large, like desktops, mobile or desktops and laptops. Um, so having percentages has helped, but when you get radically different, like designing for a mobile phone or even an iPad, um, this is a whole different animal because a lot of times it's vertical, and we think about as designers as a vertical space a lot of times. But most important, like you can't be packing like rows and rows of images into this small space. They'll just be too tiny to even really read and see. And your text, if you just use percentages or whatever, would get really relatively very small and unreadable. So what we need is a whole separate design for this device. That doesn't mean we need different graphics. We occasionally need different images at different sizes. So that's why, to recall, we use the asset generator in Photoshop to oftentimes remember how you can, depending on how you title your layer, you can create different size images. We'll review that in our demo this week. But you oftentimes need slightly different graphics. They look generally the same, but they're sized differently, and that sort of thing. So there's that. Especially with images, you don't want to have your user download a giant image if they're only going to be viewing it very small. So the images we're using today are actually fairly small already. They don't have any kind of hero images or full screen images. So we're going to start pretty simple, just so it's not very confusing. Okay, so I've made a few changes also to this layout that you guys are familiar with from your last homework assignment or a previous homework assignment. I've added some text titles at the bottom here, which means I had to enclose each one of these images within a div, so I could basically, that was the easiest way to keep the titles, with the image. So there's an encompassing div. I'm going to turn on the ugly background colors real quick in Dreamweaver and show you some of the changes I made. I also made a rule for this image up here and made it a responsive image in one way, where I've set it up to be responsive. It's actually got a width in pixels right now, but the pixels match the original size of the file. But I've stripped the width and height out of the HTML. All right, so let's look at Dreamweaver and get rolling with our media queries. Okay, so let's look at the live view. So I have this pic container. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my background so you can see this new rule. It's been applied to all, I have it basically on here 6 times. It's wrapped around every one of the images just so I could format the type easy. There's no width or height or anything on it. It's just formed by the contents. There is a margin at the top and a slight margin at the bottom. So that's what's separating the images now. I took off all the margins off of those. Okay. The images still have a border radius and that sort of thing. Okay, and then this guy up here, my Oktoberfest, it's called Oktoberfest Word. It has a width of 600 pixels. And again, I stripped out the width and height from the HTML code. So if I wanted to use a percentage here, I can, but it was sort of an awkward percentage to use because it was just an awkward percentage to use. But I want to show you how radically we can switch things with media queries. Okay, so this looks fine. The site, okay, I'm going to turn those red backgrounds off again because I can't handle it. Okay. All right, so when we start to shrink this up, we can watch in the rulers up here in pixels the width of our screen. So as we go down and down and down and down and down, and all of a sudden we hit here, and actually you can see I took the height off of my header. Again, that's formed by the content. And that way the header breaks that way, but that's still a pretty fat header, but it still looks pretty good. But the images on the side or the buttons on the side are getting a little cramped, and the text is starting to break, and all kinds of things are happening. Now, typically you'd have like different media queries for your mobile device, which would be fairly small like this, like a phone, like an iPhone or something, and another set of breaks for things that you might be looking at on the iPad. But for this demo, to keep it straightforward, we're just going to do one set of media queries, one set of breaks. So we'll pick something easy for me to remember, like 550. You've also probably noticed you can look at it on different devices down here. So like the Google Pixel, iPhone, things like that. They're all a little bit different. So of course, and these things are changing all the time. This is not a conclusive list or anything. But it looks like we should probably just break it at a width of like 450. I'm going to break it at 500 just to make it easy. So all the devices under that will. So right here, 500 pixels. We want things to look better. This is looking pretty crappy. These buttons are too small. Our images are getting tiny. So how do I want it to look? And oh, my Oktoberfest thing is split. I can't even read it. How do I want it to look? Well, probably the smart move, and this is what a lot of folks do, is they let the buttons span a single column. And in this case, I could, if I have the buttons pulled out of this, I could have 2 columns still, and that might look really good. But for today, we're going to do a single column, one on top of the other, which will be really easy to do because these are already floated. So if this picture takes up bigger space, this whole next column will knock over. Or if this first column takes up more space, the next column will automatically be shifted down to the bottom because, again, they're floated. So how do we do a media query? Okay, here we are. Very important. Up till now, everything we've been doing has been on a global level. That means that whatever rule we write, it works at any size, right? So all these rules we've written work across display devices. They're all going to be the same no matter how horribly ugly or whatever. All right, so what we need to do is say, okay, I said I wanted to have a split at 500. I want things to look different when the browser is smaller than 500 pixels. Okay, so how? Well, that's where the media query comes in. And so this little thing that we've basically ignored this whole time, at media global, this is where we insert a media query. And all you do is you hit the little plus, and you say the conditions that we want to set, and we want to do media screen, and we want to work with max width, and what did I say, 500 pixels. So all this says is with your screen width at 500 pixels, we're going to tell it what we want to happen. Now, a bunch of things, as soon as I click OK, are going to happen here in terms of how my screen looks. So when I click OK, I now have my media query listed here. It says screen and max width 500 pixels. And then you see what appeared right here. And in my style sheet, well, I'll show you that in a minute because we should probably add something. But there'll be another little line, which is my media query line. Okay, now notice when I click on global, I see all my rules still there. But when I click on screen and max width 500, there's nothing. Well, what I have to do is I have to tell it how I want to change my current rules to account for my smaller screen space. So what I would do is, well, I'd first of all shrink this under 500 pixels so I can see what I'm working on. Let's start at the top here with this Oktoberfest image. Let's just say we want to modify that. So that one's called, I have that one, that's Oktoberfest word. I have that class applied to it. So that needs to be on our media query list. So all I'm going to do is either right click on it if you have a 2-button mouse, or control click on it if you don't, and say duplicate into media query screen and max width 500 pixels. All right. Then if I go back here again, I'll see I have it there. At this point, I'm going to pull this up. I can make a change to it. So maybe now I want to use a percentage. So maybe I say, I want a percentage and I want it to be 90%. of the screen. And I had some padding on here. Let's make that padding 5%, because that would basically put this thing in the middle, right? If it's a 90% image and I have 5% padding on the left, and I'm just going to take this one off and set this to auto, just in case my math is off. But that's essentially centered. And what'll happen here, look, so this will count for all my different mobile devices. I wanted my little logo up here to stay the same size, so nothing's happening with that because I don't have this class applied to it. This class is only applied to this single word, and I called it Oktoberfest word. But see, so that's awesome. So when it's up above 500 pixels, so watch what happens. So clearly I would need another break for another media query for, basically around when that word starts at around probably 700 pixels or something. I might do that. But like I said, for now, we're going to keep this fairly simple and just do one set of media queries so you get the idea. Okay, so now that looks better, but now what do we do with this? Because again, that's looking pretty bad. So I'm going to click on it. Just remember, this was my main nav bar. All right, so we need to change that. So I have to go back to my global and my main nav bar. And probably my main nav links, I have to remember what those are. Those are set to block, and they have some margins and some padding. But there's no width and height set. So if you're not sure if you're going to have to change anything, what I would do is just go ahead and add them to your media query. So if I might need to change the links, which are forming those, I don't think I will, because for the most part they were formed by the content within inside of them. But I might want to change the size. So we're going to add it. All right, so I've added both the main nav, this bounding box, and the images, or not images, those are actually text-based links inside there, the links to my media query. And in this case, I'll say main nav, and before the width was 17%, I had a 90 pixel margin, which I can keep. I'm gonna pull this up a little bit so we can see all these guys. And there's some padding on there. I had a 4% padding and 4%. That might be keepable, so that's 8% of padding total on the width. So let's say if we want these to take up a whole line, it'd be about 90. Let's just try 90% at first and see how that looks. And ooh, that looks awful long and big. Let's do this. Let's make it be like 60% and change our padding to 20 and 20. So if I put 20% over here, ooh, not the padding, I want to change the margin. I'm going to undo that. Let's just say undo. That was oops, I went undo, I did undo twice. Let's do that again. So 60% is the width of this guy. And we want to change the margin. Before there was no margin because we wanted it butted up against the left edge. But now we can say we want the margin to be 20%. And what else do we need to change? Well, now it doesn't make sense to have a straight corner here. Before it was, again, against the left edge, but now I want to also change my corner radius. So let's go down here, and those were all in pixels. So I'm going to go ahead and keep that. I can keep those in pixels if I want. That shouldn't affect any of my math. All right, so cool. So look what happens. So again, boop. You don't need to make that sound or anything. I'll stop. So it goes from being aligned to the left and 17% wide to our new set of values. Again, right at the break up here. Okay. A little lower, because that's, okay, so let's see what we have now. So, and remember these were all floated, so, okay, that doesn't quite look centered. So I probably should take this margin and pull it back just a hair, because I forgot to account for the padding in here. Okay, remember there's some padding in here. That's a percentage of the width. So Good to remember. Right there, 4%. So that makes 20, 16%, and 4% is 20%. Perfect. Easy math. So we've added up 60%, and 4% is 20%, and then 60, that's 80, but there'd be another, that leaves another 20% on the side. So cool, that's why it's centered. Okay, now the images. I would say probably, well, we can experiment. Remember there's two columns here. Let me go ahead and turn the columns on. So let's go back to the global one, because right now there won't be any overrides. So the global one, we can change just for a minute. So my pick columns, I did have a background. I'll turn back on so we can see it. It had that green background, so we can see our two columns. Remember we had that pick columns applied twice. You know, it's a class, we've used it twice, and currently the values it has, you are going to always be running out of screen space here. The values it has, it was 30% with a 5% left margin, and it was floated to the left. And that's okay, we can still keep it floated to the left. I don't think we'll have to change that, but we can change whatever properties we want at this point. All right, just make sure we're actually looking at it under 500 pixels because that's the media query. Oh, you know what? We should probably, I'm going to save it. I'm going to jump over to the style sheet here, put it in code view so you can see what's happening in terms of the style sheet in case you do any reading. And it talks about media queries. So here's our media queries starting at line 84. All it did to do the media queries was put this at media screen and max width 500 pixels. And then whatever we've added so far is under that media query. So, you know, like I could change them here, I could change them here. I could, you know, wherever I want, whatever is preferred. I think most of us, hopefully at this point, are using our CSS designer just so we don't have to make up many spelling mistakes. But if you're totally comfortable with just changing the values over here, you can. You don't want to have to look for them in your CSS designer. Okay, that's what it looks like. All right, I'm gonna go back to my live view again. Just live view, and that's all. Okay, so my columns, just to remind myself what they are. It's called, I got my pick container within my pick columns. Okay, like I said, we don't probably need to worry about pick container because there's really nothing has really been set for my pick container. It's all just formed by the contents. I just needed a bounding box to keep my text in line. Okay, you know what I do have that's important is this text here. Like, I don't want it to split like that. So let's not worry about that just yet because maybe it'll look good when we do our pick columns. Okay, so pick columns. Did I put those on here yet? I haven't. Okay, so we'll go to pick columns and again, right click it, duplicate in the media query, max width. And then we can say, you know, on my media query, make sure we change it in the right spot. So here's just you just have to pay more attention to where you're at because now remember you have two sets of rules. They're called the same thing, right? So you're not changing the name of the rule, the selector. You're not changing the name of the selector. You're just changing the values and properties and values. So that's what gets confusing when you first start is you just got to remember that if you're on your media query, you have your screen set to that media query. Like don't be working on that media query while you're looking at the global ones. You know, make sure you put it back here and then actually make sure you select it. You're going to forget. I do it all the time. I change the global ones because I just haven't remembered to click the right ones. Just have to go back and rework it. All right, so the pick columns were set at 30% with no padding and a 5% margin. So let's make the width, let's just do a single column. And that one looks really, you know, that worked out really well because my math was easy. I have a 90%. If there's a 5% margin on the left. That basically leaves a 5% margin on the right. That might even be a little tight. Let's do this. Let's do 80%. And, okay, I hate it that it does that. 80%, and then of course this should be 10% now. Because 10 and 80 and 10 should put that guy right in the center. Now again, I'm going to set that to auto, but I could put 10%, but if there's anything I've forgotten, like if it had like a 1 pixel border somewhere or whatever, it might kind of throw it off and cause some problems. So I'm just going to leave that set to auto, but essentially let's just put 10% in just to make sure our math is correct. Still looks pretty centered, but I'm not quite, let's turn it off for a minute. Yeah, I can't see any difference, so I think we're good. But just as a catch-all, I am going to set this to auto. Okay. And so we're done. We're done. I've got to turn off that green. Let's preview this thing and see, make sure it works in our browser. Because remember, I had that single class applied to both my columns, so I basically just fixed both my columns. What is a little weird though, I do have I probably should. I have more of a gap here, so I should probably take off the. I guess I had a bottom margin on there that we should go ahead and set somewhere. Where is that? I'd have to find that and remember where I put that. So a lot of your values, you have to remember where they were initially set so you can change them, but that's the last thing I'll have to change. But let's go ahead and wrap this up. And we're set. And remember, you can also use this guy if you want to just jump around to different screen sizes, and that's totally fine. All right. Yes. All right, moment of truth. Remember, we haven't set anything for like an iPad yet, so it's going to look really ugly here for a second until we hit our breakpoint. There's our breakpoint. Once I turn off that green column, it'll look really pretty. All right, cool. That is it. That is media queries. You can add them to whatever breakpoint you want. I'm going to wrap up by adding one more. We won't set any changes to it, but just to show you and remind you where I got that thing. So if, for example, I did want to set a media query for 700 pixels, I would just go here, say media screen, hit the plus, max width, 700 pixels. Now, one really important thing to notice, there's a max width and a min width, and depending how you're working, if you're working from a desktop down, use max width. So if your initial setup for all your global variables is for a desktop or laptop computer, like we've been doing so far in this class, then use max width. If, however, later on in your career, when you're promising web designers, and you start with perhaps your design for a mobile device, so your initial rules are all set up for the mobile device, like your global rules are all set up for mobile, then what you'll be using then is you'll be working out and you'll be using a min width. I'm not going to, if that doesn't make any sense, don't worry about it. Just remember now we're using max width because we're starting with our desktop designs and working down. But that's why there's two of them and they operate essentially the same. It's just stylistically how you as a designer works. Maybe for your third project, you'll start with the mobile layout and then work out from there. But for now, media screen, max width, and then whatever pixel you want. So I'm going to click OK here and show you. See there's a second break now put in there so you can see both of them. And I can now add rules for my global onto this one as well. All right. So remember, you just right-click on whatever rule you want to add, and now I have two options to pick from in terms of where I want to add that rule. So media queries, wonderful, not too hard, and super handy and practical, and will let you accommodate